This is TWiT.
All right, so last week, during my story of the week, I brought up the word game Wordle. It is a website you go to, powerlanguage.co.uk/Wordle, and the developer of the game made this game for his partner starting out, and then it got very popular. People started playing it, and since then, we've seen a lot of people sharing. In case you still haven't gotten to the Wordle thing yet, you may have seen a lot of squares showing up on Twitter of different colors, and that was related to this game called Wordle. Shortly after that, I think one of the things that's kind of been an issue is that people are a little cheeky. And so they've been sharing these squares maybe without context. And it's one of those things where it's almost like a social test. Can you figure out what everybody's into? Can you go and find it? So people then finally come across Wordle. They type it into their search bar thinking it's an app. And they find this game called the Wordle app in the App Store. Turns out that's just a copy of the game, and this game itself actually had a premium version that you could subscribe to and pay some amount of dollars per year. The person who developed this game was in no way related to, had anything to do with the person who made the online game. And there was some kind of conversation about the way that the developer who made the app game handled things, where they were kind of going along and talking about every single step of the process and how much money they were making and how many people were signing up. And all in all, it kind of put a bad taste in people's mouths. Since that time, the developer of the game has apologized in some ways, and there's also been kind of a mass reduction in the number of Wordle clones on the App Store because the developer of the true game, the true original game, has not made it an app. It's just an online game. The developer said, hey, I want this to just be a free thing with no ads, et cetera, et cetera. But there were a whole bunch of copycats that came into the App Store, and I imagine that there will continue to be as things go on. So I was sitting there kind of thinking about this, and I thought, I need to talk to somebody who has an app in the App Store and has been in the App Store for a while and who could talk about kind of the state of the App Store a little bit, the dealing with clones, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that long introduction to the story is to welcome our guest today, James Thomson, maker of PCalc, the Dice app by PCalc, and a number of other awesome apps, as well as sort of in-apps that exist. James Thomson, welcome back to the show, I believe. I believe you've been on the show, definitely on the network before. Welcome, James.
I've definitely been on the network. It's nice to see you again in person.
Yes, good to see you too. So let's start things off with the question that I actually asked you over message about you having an app in the App Store. I asked, have you ever dealt with copycats yourself? And you had an interesting answer for me.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things if you search for PCalc that will come up. One of them is an app called PCalc Box, which is basically a fake calculator that you can hide photos in. And I'm sure there's legitimate reasons for hiding photos away, but I can think of certainly some obvious use cases for that. There's another app called PCal, which is basically a tracker for bowel movements. And certainly PCalc Box, I imagine, was named so that when people search for PCalc, a calculator, they'll see that one as well. And I'm not overjoyed about it, but it's not the kind of thing where, I'm going to be reaching for a lawyer.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the stuff with Wordle, I think, is a little more blatant than that.
Yes. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, because I think that we kind of have a differentiation because when the App Store first came out, 100 different people made their own lighter app. And so you could, flick the lighter and it would, just by shaking your phone or by swiping up on the screen. And then there were the people who made the fart apps, and there, a dozen different fart apps, and then 100 different fart apps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My question for you is, and I realize that I'm simplifying things, but that's on purpose because I would like to hear your take as a developer on what makes this particularly egregious in comparison to, 10 different people making Scrabble apps, for example.
Well, I think the thing with this is that they were using the name, the trademark that Josh Wardle had come up with. Mm-hmm. And they were deliberately doing it because there wasn't an app on the store. And they thought, get in quick, get an app up. People who hear about Wordle will look for it. They'll find their app and, maybe they'll make some money. And so they're kind of coming at this really with a sort of bad faith approach to it. I mean, like the developer of the one that we've been talking about kind of became the main character of indie dev Twitter yesterday because he subsequently apologized and he said that he wouldn't do anything like this again. But I think his approach was, well, it's just business. I'm doing this, I'll get in, I'll make some money. And I think there's certainly the more established developers don't like this kind of thing, because it gives us a bad name. We're trying to make our own original apps. And, I don't even like to look at any of the apps by competitors of mine because I don't want to see, if somebody's got a great idea, I don't want to see it and go, oh, well, that's a great idea. I should just put that in my own app. So, I try to do things somewhat in a vacuum. And I mean, the other thing is, I would say that there's obviously a spectrum of these things. There's the things. I mean, this was a functional app. You could play the game, and it's hard. I wouldn't describe it as a scam as such. It's definitely infringing trademarks or whatever. But there are things that are just out and out. They do nothing. And there's, through various means, you can get these apps in front of people and make money. And so I think there's lots of different types of problems on the App Store, and this is just one of them.
Yeah, it violated kind of the spirit of the thing, and it also violated a more kind of obvious rule that exists. And so I think that was kind of the problem with this one, is that there were multiple party fouls, so to speak. And that's kind of what made this stick out. Because yes, you did see the developer kind of celebrating the money that they were making. They clearly were jumping on something that existed. And if you look at the developers' blog posts in the past and kind of their history on Twitter and elsewhere, you see that this is an individual who tends to be focused on the financial side of things, like get rich quick on this app and then move on to the next thing. And that does feel a little bit outside of the spirit of what this game was itself, and then what developers like you are putting your stuff out there for. Does that feel accurate?
Yeah. I mean, there is literally app review guidelines that say, don't copy apps, don't use another app's name, and and Apple. So I think one of the things that people have said is that Apple is profiting from all these apps, so they don't have the impetus to deal with them. There was one going through Twitter last week, I think, which had made over $1 million or something.
Oh,
it was clearly a scam. But I don't think there is this sort of big conspiracy that Apple, is just happy to let this stuff live on the store. I don't think Apple wants scams really any more than developers do. I think the problem is cracking down on this stuff at scale. There's literally, I think it's somewhere between 4 and 5 million apps on the store currently. And, I think it's got to be quite difficult dealing with that. And you've got people say, Apple should just have a special ops team that deals with scams, and that's their entire job. And that makes sense. And I kind of have to assume that exists already. And it's really just a problem of resources. And a lot of teams in Apple are a lot smaller than you might think they are. And yeah, so I think it would be good if somebody high up said, we really need to deal with this stuff. We need to resource a group properly to look after this. But, I think there are other things that Apple could do to improve things, but it's a difficult problem.
It absolutely is. And I mean, this has kind of been the example of that. After this one really got blasted all over Twitter, then we did see Apple moving quickly to remove clones from the App Store. And I think that this is a good time to talk, too, about Apple's ad marketplace on the App Store, because I'm curious, as a developer, if I type in calculator at me as a non-developer, I go to the App Store, I type in calculator, I see PCalc. That makes sense. I'm there looking for a calculator. But what if I type in JCalc, which I don't know that exists, but let's just say that was one of your competitors, and then in that instance, should PCalc come up? Because I am technically searching for a calculator. Do developers kind of use that as a means to to help get new customers? Are they kind of playing against their opponents in that way? And is that like a standard practice?
So, yeah, this is an interesting question, very. I think when search ads were first introduced, they were kind of Apple's way of trying to fix some of the discovery problems with the App Store. And the idea being that, if you have an app that does X, you just pay for whatever keywords and you can try and get it in front of people. The problem is that, this is also a way to get your scammy apps in front of people by paying. But it's... So if you search for PCalc, you will see a variety of different things. Some are adverts for, other calculators, obviously. What I don't know is how much of that is people explicitly putting PCalc in as one of the keywords for the thing, or the App Store mechanisms saying, oh, well, this person's kind of looking for a calculator. I can tell that it's got the word calc in it, so I'm going to show them these other things. And I am absolutely sure that there is some of the stuff where you search for a very specific app, like, Twitterific or whatever, and you will see other apps that have probably advertised against that keyword. And it's also like, if somebody searches for PCalc and it brings up PCalc, and it doesn't, because I don't do adverts. I did it initially, and then I decided it felt like a bit like I was being shaken down. But back then, if somebody searched for PCalc and then clicked on the advert, rather than clicking on the PCalc that was underneath it, which is the actual entry in the store, I would get charged money. And I was getting a lot of people searching for the word PCalc, clicking the advert, and then it was just costing me money. And yeah, I think, like, when I was thinking about this, I would say the one thing that I would do is I would get rid of the whole search advertising business, because making discovery on the App Store a profit center for Apple is definitely not, it doesn't like push things in the right direction. I mean, App Store editorial themselves does great work. And, I say this partially because they have featured PCalc many times over the years. But they are also, it's a small team again, and you're dealing with, millions of apps. But the search stuff, it's just like, I think the guy who came up with the clone app even said this on Twitter. He was like, he said he didn't need to make an app called Wordle. He could have called it something else, but then just bought the Wordle search term, and that would still get lots of people to see the app. And it's difficult because, if you've got a small app, like, say there's a young developer starting out and they've got a calculator app, which is better than mine, and they want to get it in front of people, should I be able to say, well, no, you can't do that? I mean, I don't like the fact that, using a trademark as a search term is is a thing that Apple allows, but that's a thing that kind of Google adverts went through a long time ago, and kind of decided that it was a legitimate use. But yeah, it rubs me the wrong way. And yeah, I've kind of just opted out of all the advertising stuff as much as I possibly can.
Absolutely. Well, James, I've got one off-topic question for you before we let you go. Someone in the chat wants to know if you are going to make a Windows version of PCalc at any point.
So I get this question a lot, and I get it for Android too. And the problem is that, like, it's just me writing this stuff. I don't have the skills or the time, really. I mean, it's enough. It's enough just trying to keep up with what Apple does on a daily, weekly basis. That maintaining and having Windows stuff is quite, would be an additional, additional things to learn and look after.
Absolutely.
And all that. But the other problem is most of my code uses a lot of Apple technology very specifically. It's written in Objective-C and Swift, and it uses Apple's libraries and engines and stuff. So with any of these apps, I would effectively be starting from scratch. And that's a lot to do. So this is a very long-winded way of me justifying the fact that I'm saying no. It is highly unlikely that there's going to be PCalc or Dice on any other platforms other than Apple's, just because the logistics and the technology behind it makes it quite hard.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, James Thomson, thank you so much for providing your perspective here today. Where can folks go if they want to follow you online and also check out your awesome apps?
Best place to find me, myself, on Twitter, it's James Thomson, and that's Thomson without a P. And PCalc.com has a link to all my apps.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James.
Anytime.